Hello and welcome to a Bartholomew School English video. The focus here is revision for English language paper 2. You've already got the question, that's where the QR code was. And the focus of this video is the section B writing of paper 2. So let's just briefly remind ourselves how this is different from the paper 1 writing. So it's one non-fiction task. There's no choice in this paper, there's only one question to do. It'll be about opinions on something, a topic which usually relates to the section A. And you'll be asked to write a newspaper article, a letter, a speech, an online article, something like that. So here are the instructions they give. They'll ask you to spend 45 minutes on it. They will also ask you to plan and ask you to check. So it's worth noticing, as well as the time, that planning and checking are part of the task. They are not optional extras. If you decide not to plan this piece, then you're probably going to lose marks because they're marking you for that skill. So here's an example question. There'll be a statement and you're being asked to respond to that statement. So here, people have become obsessed with traveling even further and faster. However, travel is expensive, dangerous, damaging, and a foolish waste of time. So you're being asked to say whether you are for or against travel. You're asked to write a newspaper article where you argue your point of view on this statement. Now, arguing your point of view could be quite messy, so we would recommend that you decide to go for or against in these debates. It's much easier to do that in 45 minutes than to try and do a balance of both sides. You end up sounding a bit confused in your thinking. So the first thing to do is think, am I going to go for or against on this, for or against travel? And then maybe jot down a quick little spidergram of ideas to make sure you've got enough to talk about. So let's say I'm going to say travel is good. Here are some ideas to help me do that. You don't have to say I agree to an extent or anything like that. It's a newspaper article just on this topic. Newspaper articles do not begin I agree to the extent. Don't begin that way. You've got to have a much more interesting beginning if it's a newspaper article. So, some basics of how you might plan this out. Well, first of all, what kind of text is it? Well, this one's a newspaper article, so there'll probably be a little heading at the top, a little title. You don't need to do it in bold or anything like that, but it might just be travel, food for the soul or something like that. Some little tiny opening title that lets them know you know it's a newspaper. It could be a letter, in which case you're going to begin Dear Sir, Madam, or you're going to begin Dear and then the name of a person. Then there'll probably be a short introduction, which could be a short sentence, a shocking fact, questions and answer, asking them to imagine something. Just make sure that this short introduction ends with you being completely clear about the topic and your opinions. So for example, the last sentence might be, this is why I believe that travel is really beneficial for people. If you just ask a load of questions and don't say what the actual topic is about, you're going to lose your reader. So next you might have a larger paragraph which is about your arguments, so your logical reasons for why you believe what you believe, giving 2 or 3 sentences on each of your reasons at least, and using persuasive language. Your next large paragraph might be some experience that you have had or that you think most people have probably had that support your point of view. Then you might move on to likely arguments against your ideas, and then you politely say why you think these people are wrong. And then a short conclusion. So what are your final thoughts? What are your predictions, your advice? Do you have any warnings for people? How are you going to finish it off with a short conclusion? And again, if it's a letter, then you'll need yours faithfully if you put Sir, Madam, yours sincerely if you knew the name of the person that you were writing to. So in terms of basics, you need to plan ahead. From your materials given to you by your teacher, you should have some sense of the sorts of things you can do to begin a persuasive piece, and you should have your favourites amongst that. You should equally have your favourite ways of ending. So do you tend to end with a final thought or a final question or some advice? What's the thing you do at the end? You should also plan ahead, because you will definitely need to say that some things are good or helpful, so you should have some decent vocabulary to express yourself. Words like good, helpful, bad, nice, very, we need to avoid those and we need to keep it formal. Equally, you'll want to say that some things are bad or harmful, and you should have some decent vocabulary to do those things. Planning ahead, how are you going to phrase your disagreement? So are you going to say, some people would argue that, or there is a school of thought that seems to believe that, or some people, in my view, wrongly believe that? How are you going to introduce the part where you say there are other people who don't agree with me, and then you just politely explain why you think you're still right? And what's the advanced punctuation you can use? A more advanced approach, well, it will consider whether this order is the right order to do it. So some newspaper articles tend to begin with a lengthy anecdote before going into the arguments. They change the order round. So you haven't got to write it in this way. You'll take a bit more ownership of planning it in a way that suits that particular task and how you want to write it. A more advanced answer will definitely have 1 or 2 short paragraphs for dramatic impact. So as well as that plan, there'll be little short paragraphs in between the longer ones, which are just there for a little bit of drama. It will make sure that ideas are not repeated, so the argument and the attack won't just be the same ideas repeated again. They'll also make sure that the tone matches the topic. They're usually fairly serious topics, but once in a while they can be a little bit more light-hearted, and you've got to make sure that you match the topic in terms of the seriousness of your points and how you attack the other side. You don't want to go in too strong if it's not that kind of topic. In terms of your sentence level skills, vocabulary is enormous. So really being good on your vocabulary, and that word good is one that you're not going to use, so making sure that you've got a range of ways of saying things that are intelligent ideas or beneficial or possibly damaging or just not very intelligent ideas. You've got different words for that. Don't be using words you don't know the meaning of, but you should have a range of different ways of saying those things. You will need to say them, so saying them in a mature way. Also different ways of saying definitely, different ways of saying I would argue, different ways of saying idea, so you don't just keep repeating the same basic words. You'll also probably have some mature phrases. So there are certain phrases that people use when they're arguing, which just add a lovely mature style to the way they're writing. There are certain ways that you introduce anecdotes. There are certain ways that you introduce points that you're about to take apart and say that you don't think they're right. So you can prepare those. It's not about learning lots, but it's having a few that you know work well for you. So as well as that, a more advanced answer will use sentence length and sentence openings for different styles. Short sentences for impact, beginning with adverbs, present participles, adjectives in order to give an impact to their sentence at the start. It'll probably have some semantic fills, links, analogies, imagery in there. Not as much as a creative piece, but if you say travel is food for the brain, that's a metaphor. So there'll be a little bit of that in there, I would have thought. And they will absolutely nail the full range of punctuation, but they will not overuse it. So it won't be too many semicolons than you would genuinely realistically have in a piece of that kind, for example. They will, but you'll give them enough to show that you know how to use it properly. Finally, check and improve it. Just reading it at the end is of no value to you, but if you make 5 or 6 changes, so you add in punctuation that you've missed, you realise that could have been a paragraph break, you change a word to a better word. If you do that 5 or 6 times, you could get the next grade. So make sure that you use your time at the end. Anybody who's got time to spare in that exam has mistimed it, because you should be really up against it in terms of time. Best of luck. Make sure you go through your notes and do some planning in advance for this. There's a lot you can prepare for.